Today we are going to discuss about Karl Marx and his dialectical materialism. Now the very word dialectical materialism has to be explained a little more. The word dialectics is part of philosophy ever since the sophists, which of course Socrates has taken. Now when the sophists used dialectics as a method, basically it is like a question and answer. They raise questions about the opponent's view and then they try to respond to them. So it is like they have an imaginary response that is given by the opponent, and then they would raise a question to that and then make the opponent answer and then try to show by posing a counter question that they are wrong. Sophists are very persuasive about it. So they want to show the opponent is wrong. So it's a very powerful method, which of course Socrates had made use of that. So basically it is a process of logical argumentation and refutation. So what is the purpose of this dialectics in the early Greek philosophy? The purpose of dialectics is to arrive at the true ideas, because you are now in error, and I want to show that you are in error, and I can help you to arrive at true ideas by refuting yours. Hegel gave a twist to this. Hegel did not think of dialectics as a process of arriving at true ideas, but he thought ideas themselves evolve. So ideas are not something that you come to arrive at, but ideas are part and parcel of that continual process of contradiction and resolution. So this is where Hegel gave a twist. So the whole of history begins from idea and then it evolves through this process of contradiction and it reaches a resolution. So Hegel had this: you begin with a thesis, then you have an antithesis, then it comes to the synthesis. Then the synthesis becomes a thesis to which there comes an antithesis, and then you come to your synthesis. So the whole of history of ideas, is a constant, continual process of contradiction. But the contradiction is in terms of the ideas. Now obviously, it is unavoidable direction. That is a telos, that is an end goal. The direction of this contradiction is very clear. Finally, we will arrive at, according to Hegel, what he called the absolute idea, or in other words, absolute spirit. The German word he used is Geist, which can be translated either into idea or a spirit. Now this has powerfully influenced Marx, this idea of contradiction. And therefore, most of the people who came after Hegel were Hegelian. Either they are right Hegelians or left Hegelians. Marx came to be characterized as the left Hegelian. Now the right Hegelians, as different from the left Hegelians, looked at the writings of Hegel's understanding of politics and of the state, so that they can justify the political status quo in contemporary Prussia. And they argued the modern state represents the height of historical evolution and the final resolution of historical contradictions. For example, we have in the person of Fukuyama, a Japanese thinker who is a right Hegelian, who thinks capitalism as we have today is the end of this historical evolution. It has reached its apex. So it is the final resolution of all contradictions. Now when we speak about right Hegelians, what I am speaking of is that they are appropriating Hegel's ideas in actual political history. Hegel is basically thinking in terms of ideas, the contradiction ideas. Now Hegelians think the contradiction actual history, actual politics. So of course they think we have reached at the final resolution of historical contradictions. The left Hegelians, of course inaugurated by Marx, they believe the society is far from fully evolved and it is still in a state of contradiction. So there is a lot of social division and civil unrest, and this increasing polarization of society between the rich and the poor calls for another antithesis, another contradiction, which will lead to the final stage. So obviously the idea of socialism came to exist. Basically, socialism is an idea that advocates abolition of private property, and obviously it was influencing many radical European intellectuals. Marx was attracted to socialism. Socialism was not an invention of Marx. Socialism existed already at the time of Marx, and there are many socialist thinkers. Particularly, socialism had a very strong influence under the Ethiopian socialist called Saint-Simon. In English, of course, you can call him Saint Simon. It's a French name. He lived in the 18th century. Of course, after the beginning of 19th century. So Marx was not taking his idea of socialism fully. So he thought that socialism has certain naivety, particularly the socialism as proposed by Saint-Simon is naive, it is naively idealistic. So Marx began to develop his own theory of integrating economics and philosophy into socialism. So Marx's project therefore has to be seen as a synthesis between two distinct intellectual approaches. The first one is the Hegelian philosophical view of evolution, and then the second one is his keen interest in the economy that is built on the insight of classical economic theories like Adam Smith and David Ricardo. So, brief idea about Karl Marx. One of the things that is very fascinating about Karl Marx is he was hardly known at the time of his life. When he died, in fact, there were only a few people, including his friends like Engels, the 3 or 4 people for his funeral service. And one of the things that Engels said in that funeral speech, the obituary, is that Marx can be forgotten for anything, but we cannot forget him for the inspiration that he gave us. Namely, human person must first eat, drink, have shelter before he can meaningfully engage in art and philosophy. We'll come back to this idea because this is the foundation of Marxist philosophy or Marx's philosophy. So in his own lifetime, Marx was not very successful, he was not known, and his life was miserable. In fact, he was even expelled from France, and he spent 2 years in Brussels, where his partnership with Engels intensified. So it is at that time he co-authored with Engels the pamphlet called the Communist Manifesto. It was published in 1848. So in this Communist Manifesto, Marx asserted that all human history had been based on class struggles. But he also asserted that this class struggle would disappear with the victorious emergence of the working class or the proletariat. Marx lived most of his life in poverty. In fact, he lived on the generosity of Engels. But Marx, it is at this time, produced his political masterpiece called the Das Kapital. And Das Kapital is often called the Bible of the working class in Europe. Well, he died in 1883 and was buried in Highgate Cemetery in London. Now let us focus on his analysis of the capitalist society. Marx, along with Engels, in the Communist Manifesto, makes this famous and provocative statement. History of all hitherto existing societies is the history of class struggle. Marx argues that all changes that happens shape the society, political institutions, and history itself. And these changes are driven by a process of collective struggle on the part of groups of people with similar economic situations in order to realize their material and economic interests. Now, there is a lot of debate about this particular claim of Marx. We will come back to that at the time of discussion. So, Marx says these struggles occurred throughout history, from ancient Rome through the Middle Ages to the present day. There have always been struggles of economically subordinate class against economically dominant class, who tend to oppose the economic interests of the subordinate class. So in the ancient times, we had this struggle between slaves against the masters. Then in the feudal society, we had the struggle of the serfs against their landlords. In the modern industrialized world, this struggle is between the bourgeoisie or the business class and the working proletariat. Now, Marx said how there is a shift from each of these phases, how the society changed from master-slave dialectic to serf-landlord dialectic, and then how it moved on to bourgeoisie-proletariat dialectic. Now, until in the feudal society, obviously what mattered was the landowners. They were the ones who were holding the economy. Obviously, that was part of the feudal order. Of course, then the struggle and the revolution happened. Obviously, it gave rise to the modern industrial world, and that shaped the political institution and society very differently. But again, it gave rise to a new class called the bourgeoisie class, as opposed to the subordinate class, which is the proletariat class. So in every society, there have been a dominant class and a subordinate class. Only the nature of that class has changed depending on that society, but that class struggle remained in every society. And Marx also claimed the bourgeoisie is the most spectacular force in history to date. This is the reason why he says is that the merchant zeal for accumulation had led them to conquer the globe, forcing everyone everywhere to adopt the capitalist mode of production. In other words, they see the whole world as one market. It's a market for exchange. And this has changed all aspects of society, destroying traditional ways of life and rural civilization. Obviously, we end up creating enormous cities in the place of rural civilization. So under industrialization, the means of production and exchange that drive this process of expansion and change have created a new subordinate urban class whose fate is linked to that of the bourgeoisie. He calls this class as the industrial proletariat or modern working class. Now, one of the claims of Marx is these workers have been uprooted by the expansion of capitalism and forced to sell their labor to the bourgeoisie. And according to Marx, this offends them to the core of their existence. Because the workers in the earlier ages were the owners of what they created. Now they don't own anything, and they don't decide to, fix a price for what they have created. So therefore, modern industrial workers are exploited by the bourgeoisie and forced to compete with one another for ever-shrinking wages as the means of production grow more sophisticated. This unfolds right in front of our eyes, so Marx is right in some respects. Now, what is the meaning of mode of production? Marx uses this term to refer to a specific organization of economic production in a given society. According to him, a mode of production includes the means of production and also the labor. Means of production means factories, machines, raw materials, and other facilities. These are the means by which you produce goods. But the means of production alone is not enough. You also need labor. So there is a relation of production between the means of production and the labor. Or to be more precise, the relationship is between those who own the means of production and those who are merely laborers. Those who own the means of production are the capitalists, because they are the ones who own the factories, the machines, the raw materials, and other facilities. So history for him evolves through the interaction between the mode of production and the relations of production. The mode of production constantly evolves towards a realization of its fullest productive ability. But this evolution creates antagonism between the classes of people defined by the relations of production. In other words, between the owners of means of production and the workers. Capitalism is a particular mode of production because it is based on the private ownership of the means of production. Now, Marx is not against mode of production in general, but he says there is a problem with capitalism because the means of production is owned by few individuals, the capitalists, the bourgeoisie. Capitalists produce commodities for the exchange market, and to stay competitive must extract as much labor as possible from the workers at the lowest possible cost. So therefore, the economic interest of the capitalist is to pay the worker as little as possible. In fact, just to keep them alive so that they can be productive. So the workers begin to realize that their economic interest lies only in preventing the capitalists from exploiting them this way. So therefore, the social relations of production in the capitalistic mode of production is inherently antagonistic. It cannot be anything other than that. And therefore, it necessarily gives rise to class struggle. So it's not that you cannot avoid it. Sooner or later, that is going to manifest itself. So Marx believes this will lead to the overthrowing of capitalism by the proletariat. So the proletariat will replace the capitalist mode of production with another mode of production which will be based on collective ownership of the means of production. So the collective ownership of the means of production is what he calls communism. So this is a basic analysis of his capitalist society. One of the important aspects of this is that in the society there are two kinds of structures. There is a base structure, there is a superstructure. Economy is the base structure. It is the economic structure that determines all other structures. So if your economic structure is based on the capitalist mode of production, then every other structure, including your art, philosophy, religion, everything would reflect it, or everything would be made in such a way to justify this capitalist mode of production. So that's what he means. That is why the famous statement of Engels, at the funeral speech of Marx, human person must first eat, drink and have shelter before he or she can meaningfully engage in art, philosophy and religion. One of the key concepts in Marx's philosophy is the idea of alienation. So let us spend a few minutes in trying to understand what this concept is. In fact, the early writings of Marx is more philosophical than economic, precisely because of the way in which he makes use of some of these terms. Marx describes how the worker under the capitalist mode of production becomes estranged from himself, from his work and from others. Marx thinks that labor is central to human being insofar as it is a labor that defines the human being, and it also the labor which gives the human being the sense of well-being. So human being by nature is a creative being, somebody who is capable of creating through his or her work. By working on and transforming objective matter into sustenance and objects of use value, human beings meet the needs of existence. So they come to see themselves externalized in the world. Externalized in the world because their creative ability is externalized into the raw material by transforming it into something of a use value. So that is how they are externalized in the world. So labor is an act of personal creation, but it is also a projection of one's identity. Because when you make something, you call it my child in some way. It's not biological child. When you publish a book, for example, you call it my brain child. When you create something with your hand, your craft, you feel very happy about it because something of your identity is also seen there. But at the same time, it is also a means of survival. So you have both these things. There is a kind of personal creation, projection of identity on the one hand, but also it helps you to survive. But what capitalism does is that it deprives human beings of this essential source of self-worth and identity. Why? Because it is the means of production is in the hands of private ownership. So therefore the work began to be understood only as a means of survival. So there is no question of personal creation involved in the work. There is no question of projecting of your identity into that work. So if you know some of the traditional craftsmen, it's not so much about the money value they would be interested in. They would be paying a lot of attention to the details about how elegant they are creating it, because they see something of their own identity projected into that which they are creating. There is a lot of sense of personal satisfaction to that. Now, in the capitalist mode of production, the laborer is deprived of this, because the products of the labor does not belong to him or her. The products are expropriated by capitalists and sold for profit. So therefore, in the capitalism, the worker is alienated or estranged from the products he creates. But he is also estranged from the process of production itself. Why? Because he sees this whole process of production merely as a means of survival. So, estranged or alienated from the production process, the worker is estranged from his or her own humanity. So, one of the important human conditions is the ability to transform nature into useful objects. So, when you are deprived of that because your products are expropriated and sold for profit, then you are also estranged from your humanity. So Karl Marx says the worker is thus alienated from his or her species being, meaning to say from what it is to be human. So that is a technical term used from species being. The capitalist mode of production also alienates human beings from other human beings. Why is that? Because once you are not satisfied, as you are deprived from owning the product of your labor, the worker regards the capitalist as external and hostile. So that alienates you from other human beings. So therefore the relationship is inherently antagonistic. So Marx develops this idea of alienation in a very philosophical manner. But then Marx is not trying to analyze the concept, alienation or estrangement just by speculating the idea, but he is concretely deriving it from the human condition, the actual human condition. That is why he is to be considered a positivist thinker. So he is using the scientific methods in applying to the social relationship, in this case between the capitalists and the bourgeoisie, and he is trying to reflect on this alienation. Now we shall also try to focus on his idea of historical materialism. So as I told you in the beginning, Hegel had a profound impact on Marx. Hegel elaborated a dialectical view of human consciousness as a process of evolution from simple to more complex categories of thought. So according to Hegel, human thought has evolved from very basic attempts to grasp the nature of objects to higher forms of abstract thought and self-awareness. I mean, this is what exactly we see the difference between the children and the grown-up. Marx takes this very seriously and says history evolves through a similar dialectical process, whereby the contradictions of a given age give rise to a new age based on a smoothing over of these contradictions. That's why I said a thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. The synthesis is the smoothing over of these contradictions. So in that sense, Marx developed a view of history similar to Hegel, but the main difference between both of them is that Hegel is an idealist and Marx is a materialist. That is why it is known as the historical materialism. In other words, Hegel believed that ideas are the primary mode in which human beings relate to the world. And history can be understood in terms of the ideas that define each successive historical age. Marx, on the other hand, believed that the fundamental truth about a particular society or a period in history is how the society is organized to satisfy material needs. This is the originality of Marx. He takes Hegel's idea very seriously, but turns Hegel upside down. While Hegel thought it was the human being's ability to relate to the world through ideas, because ideas define historical age, whereas Marx said it is in terms of satisfying material needs. So Hegel saw history as a succession of ideas and a working out of contradiction on a conceptual level. So Hegel's thinking is basically at the concept. But for Marx, history is a succession of economic systems or mode of production. Why? Because it is all about satisfying material needs, and therefore it is fundamentally economical, and that is why economy is the base structure. Now, each system or each economic mode of production is organized to satisfy human material needs, but it gives inevitably rise to antagonisms between different classes of people, leading to the creation of new societies in an evolving pattern. One of the influences of Marx is also about the labor theory of value. Now, what is the labor theory of value? The labor theory of value means that the value of a commodity is determined by the amount of the labor that went into producing it. Today, in the capitalist mode of production and consumption, the value is not depending on the amount of labor that went into producing it, but it is all about the fluctuating relationship between the supply and demand. Marx defines a commodity as an external object that satisfies our wants or needs, and distinguishes between two kinds of value that can be attributed to it. Commodities have a use value. And the use value implies that it has the capacity to satisfy people's wants and needs. For the purpose of economic exchange, they have an exchange value. Their value in relation to other commodities on the market, which is measured in terms of money, money being the common denominator. Marx affirms that in order to determine the relative worth of extremely different commodities with different use values, exchange values, or monetary value must be measurable in terms of a property common to all such commodities. What is that property that is common to all such commodities? For him, it is the labor itself. The value of the commodity in the market represents the amount of labor that went into the production. So because all this property has one common thing. It is born out of the labor. The labor has a value. So the labor theory is important in Marx's work not because it gives special insight into the nature of prices. In any case, economists today do not use this to explain the price of different commodities, but because it forms the foundation of Marx's understanding of exploitation. In the simplest form of exchange, people produce commodities and sell them so that they can buy other commodities to satisfy their own needs and wants. Something similar to the barter system, right? I grow something in my farm, and then I give that to you. You have something in your farm, and I get it. So we have something of an exchange. And of course, when the barter system did not exist, we begin to use money. We begin to give some value in terms of monetary value to the products that we produce and the products that we would like to get exchanged with. In such exchanges, money is only the common medium that allows for transactions to take place. But capitalists, in contrast, are motivated not by a need for commodities, but by a desire to accumulate money. So there is a great shift. It is no longer that we want to have this product and money is only a medium, but now money becomes an end goal itself. So the desire to accumulate money drives the capitalists. So capitalists take advantage of their power to set wages and working hours to extract the greatest amount of labor from the workers at the lowest possible cost, selling the products of the workers at a higher price than the capitalists paid for them. That is exploitation. And in order to explain this exploitation, he brings this labor theory of value. Rather than buy or sell products at their true exchange value as determined by the labor that went into making them, capitalists enrich themselves by extracting what he calls a surplus value from their laborers. So if capitalists is able to make more profit, the surplus value is from the labor itself, and therefore it belongs to the laborers, the surplus value. So that is what this exploitation is all about. So Marx pointed to the abject poverty of industrial workers in places like Manchester for a proof of the destructive effects of exploitative relationship. While Marx is very positive about the labor theory of value, he also has another important criticism to make about our attachment to commodity as well. He calls this as commodity fetishism. You all know the word fetish refers to any object that people fixate on or are fascinated by. It keeps them from seeing the truth. When you are attached to something, you fail to see the truth. You are fixated on that. So that is what the fetish is all about. According to Marx, when people try to understand the world in which they live, they fixate on money. Who now has it, who has acquired it, and then they are fixated on this money, or they fixate on commodities, trying to understand economics as a matter of what it costs to make or buy a product, what the demand for a product is, and so on. So the commodities and money are fetishes that prevent people from seeing the truth about economics and society. They are fetishes because they kind of create a desire in us to be fixated on them rather than looking at the society and the economics at large. What is the truth about economics and society? Is the one class of people is exploiting another. But we fail to see that precisely because of the fetishism that is involved. In capitalism, the production of commodities is based on the exploitative economic relationship between owners and workers, owners of factories, owners of the means of production, and the workers who produce the commodities. In everyday life, we think only of the market value of a commodity. In other words, its price. But this monetary value simultaneously depends on the masks that someone was exploited to make that commodity. This is masked, this fact is masked, and that monetary value depends on masking this fact as well. So this concept of commodity fetishism applies both to the perceptions of normal people in everyday life and also to the formal study of economics. Economists, for the most part, earlier and today as well, study economy in terms of the movements of money, goods and prices, which is essentially the point of view of corporation. From this point of view, the social dimension of economic life is considered unscientific and unworthy of discussion. So it is Marx's argument that commodity fetishism allows capitalists to carry on with day-to-day affairs of a capitalist mode of production without having to confront the real implication of the system of exploitation on which they depend. Now a word about Marx's understanding of religion. So as a caution, I must tell Marx was not interested in critiquing religion, and that is not his purpose. His purpose is to criticize economics primarily, and in particular the capitalist mode of production. We remember economics is the base structure. So religion is only a superstructure along with philosophy and art. So many people have misquoted Marx when it comes to religion, particularly when they quote the famous statement, religion is nothing other than the opium of the people. The purpose of the opium is to drug the mass and then create a dull mind in them. But this is not very accurate. So what Marx said in his this particular statement that he made is in his book called The Critique of Hegel's Philosophy of Right. It is much deeper in analysis and broader in implications. So we should try to understand his critique on religion in the right spirit rather than misquoting it. I quote this statement of Marx in its entirety, which he gives right as part of his introduction in his work, Critique of Hegel's Philosophy of Right. I quote Marx: religious suffering is at one and the same time the expression of real suffering and a protest against real suffering. I repeat that statement. Religious suffering is at once and the same time the expression of real suffering and a protest against real suffering. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, the soul of soulless condition. It is the opium of the people. And a few lines later he says, the abolition of religion as the illusory happiness of the people is the demand for their real happiness. The criticism of religion is therefore in embryo the criticism of that vale of tears of which religion is the halo. Criticism has plucked the imaginary flowers on the chain, not in order that man shall continue to bear that chain without fantasy or consolation, but so that he shall throw off the chain and cull the living flower. Now, if you analyze this quote very carefully, without only paying attention to religion is the opium of the people exclusively, then you realize that Marx is quite positive about religion and at the same time negative. So he is not entirely negative. So in the context, if you look at religion as the opium of the people, it is not just merely a drug of the masses to keep their mind dull, but it is also opium in the sense that it gives some relief, it gives some comfort to those who face impossible circumstances. So Marx's criticism about religion is not something totally negative. This is because, as he says, religion also gives expression to the real suffering, but it is also a protest against real suffering. The protest happens by a way of, seeking some comfort, some refuge. So that is why religion comes as a sigh of the oppressed creature. It does console you. It is still a heart. The world is heartless. It is still a soul in conditions that are soulless. Yet, religion is to be critiqued because the happiness that religion gives is just illusory happiness. What people, on the contrary, need is the real happiness. Sure, religion is fine to some extent, but that is not enough. In fact, what we need is the real happiness. So you cannot all the time take refuge in religion to derive some illusory happiness. The danger is if you keep taking refuge in religion all the time, you may be happy for a moment, but again you have to come back to life and meet the struggle. You will never get the real happiness until and otherwise you realize that you are in chains. Once you realize that you are in chains, then obviously you will try to seek the real happiness. Religion, on the contrary, by providing this illusory happiness, is somehow preventing you from seeing that you are in chains. It's like the imaginary flowers on the chain. You look at the imaginary flowers and say, you have the sigh and you are comforted, you are consoled, but that doesn't help. So religion has a role to some extent, yes, but it is not enough. So religion is For him, in the class struggle, religion is wholly dependent upon and is birthed by the material and economic realities which society faces. In a society where there is exploitation, religion is born to meet some needs, in this case, obviously, to give illusory happiness to the suffering masses. It is in that sense, it's a protest against suffering. So, religion is a manifestation of a society's defense mechanism. So, it is not only the expression of society's suffering, but it is also a protest against it. And this suffering is caused by material and economic injustices and political injustice as well. So, Marx thinks or believes that by criticizing and abolishing religion, one would be able to inculcate within society the foundation of political revolution, or at least its evolution. So, Marx's focus is not to find fault with the religion. Marx's focus is to find fault with the existing economic injustices, the material injustices, and the politics that accompany them. Now, the biggest problem with the religion is it prevents you from seeing that injustice, because it keeps you giving you illusory happiness. It is like when you have a toothache, and suppose if your tooth is decayed completely, it's a decay that you need to address. Not just the pain is only a symptom of the toothache. So if you keep taking the painkiller, yes, it's a relief, it's helpful, yes. But what happens? That you are forgetting the pain prevents you from noticing the decay and really addressing the problem. Now that's exactly what religion does. So religion is not the focus of his critique, it is economy. Though religion may offer you happiness, it is only illusory, just like the painkiller. In that sense, it is the opium. It is a drug. It consoles you, it comforts you, it gives you relief from the pain. Maybe you need it at a certain point in time, because if the pain is unbearable, yes, but you cannot just keep on giving yourself the painkiller without addressing the problem. And if painkiller does only that, then probably you should throw it away, and then you can really address the issue. You can address the decay of the tooth rather than just subsiding that pain. If you want to have evolution in society or a political revolution, then obviously religion has to be thrown from that point of view. Right, to conclude Marx's thinking, I just tried to sum up his ideas. We cannot, Marx himself can be discussed for a full 4-credit course, but that's not our point. At Marx's funeral in Highgate Cemetery, Engels declared that Marx made 2 discoveries: the law of development of human history and the law of motion of bourgeois society. He also said Marx was before all else a revolutionist. Marx, according to Engels, was the best hated and the most calumniated man of his time. Yet he also died beloved, revered, and mourned by many revolutionary fellow workers. Now, there's a lot of contradictory emotions that Marx has created, and that is reflected in the conflicting aspects of his character, because Marx was a combination of a rebel, a Promethean rebel, and a rigorous intellectual at the same time. He gave many persons an impression of intellectual arrogance. In fact, a Russian writer by name Annenkov observed that Marx, in debate in 1846, he recalled that he spoke only in the imperative. That sounds like an arrogant statement. You should, it can be very arrogant. So it's like it's a personification of a dictator in that sense. But the fact is, Marx felt uneasy before mass audiences and avoided any atmosphere of controversies. Be that as it may, Marx was willing to sacrifice anything in the battle for his conception of a better society. He regarded struggle as the law of life and existence. The influence of Marx's ideas, therefore, has been enormous. As I told you, his masterpiece Das Kapital was officially called the Bible of the working class in a resolution of the International Working Men's Association. So the Marx has given rise to many thinkers. We would not be able to discuss all of them. There are also neo-Marxists, and not that all of them agree with one another. But definitely one particular school we would like to look at is the Frankfurt School, or the critical theory. I mean, they take this idea of critical thinking of Marx very seriously, but they don't stand there, they go beyond. So we will discuss that in the successive lectures. Thank you.